The next item of business is a debate on motion number SCM 3427 in the name of Mary Mulligan on housing.
Unfortunately, Minister, you come to housing at a time of crisis. Not my words, but those of the Scottish Federation of Housing Associations in their submission to the Local Government and Communities Committee yesterday, and one that the Scottish Government appears to share since they have not amended the motion. And one of the many ways of witnessing that crisis is by looking at the number of houses being built. The SNP government has pledged itself to build 35,000 houses per year. Yet in the first 6 months of last year, just over 11,000 houses were built in Scotland. And let's remember that's before the full force of the credit crunch hits. And in fact, it marks a fall of 1,600 houses from the previous year. But even worse, included in that was a fall of 600 houses in the social rented sector, something that this government is responsible for. Cabinet Secretary, the numbers of houses that the Scottish Government is completing is falling. What is the Government going to do about it? One of the ways the Scottish Government could reverse this fall would be by properly investing in housing associations. Housing associations have an excellent record in building new housing and renovating old stock. But this Government put that at risk by changing the housing association grant formula. To be fair, I accept the Scottish Government have taken the action to try to get better value for the public pound. But the principle was wrong and its timing was absolutely out of place. I also recognise that the Cabinet Secretary tried yesterday to reverse that damage, but it was a little too late. When ministers realised the damage that was being done, they should have reversed the changes, not just this half-hearted move. Lenders were reluctant to lend under the new HAG formula, untested and riskier as it was, and only time will tell whether they will be more willing to after the limited change that we've seen. It may be too late for some housing associations who may already have agreed their development plans and rent levels for next year. So having made one mistake, can I ask the Cabinet Secretary not to make another? I know that the proposals on the lead developer model are still out for consultation, but Cabinet Secretary, this measure is proving very unpopular, and you may do well to drop the proposal now. I know my colleague Joanne Lamont will say more on this, but let me say, I have no problem with housing associations working together. In fact, there are good examples across Scotland of this actually happening. But the competition that this proposal could introduce would not benefit housing associations or those in need of housing.
The Scottish Conservatives welcome today's debate. We have been consistent in that we have opposed the SNP government's decision to sanction a new generation of council houses, because we continue to believe that what funding is available to build new social housing for rent in Scotland should go to our housing associations. Housing associations have demonstrated that they have the expertise and experience to create good new housing in sustainable mixed communities. Their record often stands in sharp contrast to that of councils. On the housing association grant front, I have listened to the concerns of housing associations about the negative impact changes to HAG are having on their ability to provide affordable homes. Indeed, on behalf of housing associations in my own area of the Highlands and Islands, I have corresponded with the former minister repeatedly. And it seems, judging by the Cabinet Secretary's announcements yesterday, the ministers have gone some way towards addressing some of the worries that exist, albeit at a very late stage for many housing associations, when many have already made financial decisions for the coming year and for a temporary period only. I will be interested in their reaction. Our concern was to ensure that any changes in the HAG grant must result in more houses being built and not fewer, as seems to be the case. And ministers have yet to put forward a convincing case as to how housing associations will be able to find the estimated extra 5,000 or 6,000 private loan per unit, which they will still need even after yesterday's announcement, when the availability and costs of borrowing is more restricted and more expensive than when these changes were introduced. And I note the concern of the SFHA that Scottish Government thinking is wrong to blame the housing associations for being inefficient developers and for rising HAG levels over the last 5 years, when in fact housing associations, just like private developers, have had to deal with sharply rising land prices and higher construction costs. While we always strive for efficiency, and indeed welcome reducing the void assumption from 2% to 1%, as we all would like to see the lowest possible number of empty houses, we also understand that housing associations have to compete with the private sector for available land. Ministers need to work as closely as possible with the housing association sector to deliver the affordable housing units we all want to see. The housing association sector stands ready to help the government deliver its housing targets, but it needs the appropriate support to do this.
I now call on Nicola Sturgeon.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can I begin today by placing on record my thanks to Stuart Maxwell for his contribution over the past 2 years. Many of the achievements I will talk about today are in no small measure down to his hard work and commitment. Let me also say that, subject to the approval of Parliament later today, I am very much looking forward to working with Alec Neil, who I am sure will carry on that good work and create plenty of thunder. Of the industry does need support, which is why we have accelerated £120 million of housing investment to this year and next, twice as much pro rata as the case in England. This year's allocation is fully committed, and we will support over 1,700 new homes across Scotland. And on that point, yes, I've taken into
John Lamont.
I wanted to know if you could tell us what proportion of the money you've brought forward has actually been spent in supporting development rather than in land banking or buying off the shelf housing that's already in existence.
Most people who know anything about housing recognise and agree that the sensible way to support that money is, firstly, to support new development, secondly, to give housing associations the opportunity to purchase land, and thirdly, to help the housing industry by buying, where appropriate, off-the-shelf purchases. That's what we were asked to support, and it's what we are supporting. But of course it is incumbent on us not just to spend more, but to get more houses for our money. That's why we did revise the Hague assumptions last year, and we were right to do so. But we have listened, the world has changed, and that's why yesterday we announced new assumptions that were welcomed by the SFHA and described as a considered response. This demonstrates we are a listening government. We will continue to listen during the consultation on investment reform. We do recognise we live in difficult times, but we are committed to working with all partners to get through them and to ensure that this government will not only oversee the best homelessness legislation in the world, Presiding Officer, this government will also build the houses to make it work.
I made it before. I do think that in reacting sensibly and responsibly to this current crisis, we should recognise that if we are trying to boost the availability of homes, we are not trying to do so to recreate the market that has just, the bubble of which has just burst. That we are in fact trying to rebuild a market that recognises that some of the previous model was much misguided. And to that extent, I hope that whether it's in the private or in the public sector, or sorry, in the private sector, and particularly with housing associations, that there is a far greater emphasis on building houses to rent than for houses to buy. Because I think there is a very urgent need to build a very, very substantial rental sector in Scotland to take account of what I think will be, for a very long time, very changed circumstances in that housing. Finally, I make one plea to the Cabinet Secretary. I know
the member should wind up.
It's a very clever point, and it really sounds terribly clever, but I find it very childish and very churlish to believe that a house built with public money by a housing association is to be distinguished by a house built with public money that goes to a local council, and to go on and on about only building 6 houses is churlish and is not fit. You make a far better Cabinet Secretary. The remark is not worthy of you, and I do wish you would drop it.